This has been a very thought-provoking day, really, and the thought that struck me in mid-morning was that my wife Maureen and I went out to the pictures recently, one Saturday night, as is our wont, and on the way out we met a colleague from the Scottish Government, and it was easy to remember her name because 50% of women in Scotland are called Fiona. So you've only got a 1 in 2 chance of being wrong. Hello, Fiona. Hello, she said. And we got talking about movies, and she introduced me to her friend. And I kid you not, her name was, yeah, you get it, Fiona. And Fiona's favourite movie, as conversation went on, was Local Hero. Now, people who've seen that, of course, will remember that the music behind that was written and played by Mark Knopfler. And it put me in mind of something he'd said, actually, that when he went on tour, and I think he spent most of the 1980s on tour, his playing got worse and worse and worse. So you know those little monitor speakers they have so they can actually hear what they're playing. He said as they went around the place, his own playing got worse. And as he got more tired, it got more jagged and more clipped. And that reminded me of the way in which musicians, particularly, just keep practicing their basics. So they have a technique that they rely on, that they were trained into, that defines their professionalism, which they keep going back to. It's not something that they did once and have now forgotten about and are far too grand to do. So concert pianists play their scales, don't they? And athletes, similarly, in all sorts of disciplines, are constantly working their way through the basics of their technique and remembering that their excellence rests on its perfection and its development, and that's a lively and an active thing. Now, the thought that struck me this morning is that maybe improvement is at the heart of our technique as professionals, and that this process of defining and articulating, developing and extending our technique for us ought to be a lifelong responsibility as we work in public services. And the interesting thing about this is the way in which the sort of here and now of our daily lives, what a colleague in one of the groups called the drama and the detail, that so easily swamps what we're doing. It's the equivalent of us being on tour, like Mark Knopfler. So you go to work and it just descends on you, inundated by stuff and things that you have to do. It's so easy to lose sight of the fundamental purposes, and particularly what we as leaders in organisations actually get paid to do. So, and then you find yourself focusing on the small things. And if you work in a Scottish Government context, you can find yourself concentrating on the policy rather than its intentions and the broader picture within which it sits. So that's the preface for the few things I wanted to say. So I wanted to begin with that point. The danger of here and now, the drama and the detail, is something as professionals we need to be aware of. And what I thought today has brought out superbly is the potential of developing that common language and practice as an improvement as our professional base. Now, contributions today have brought out several things about it. Firstly, it actually works. It has got an evidence base around it. It can help us to deliver outcomes in complex settings. That's particularly important. And the afternoon drew out very strongly that this is actually not a technocratic discipline. It's deeply empowering in its potential. I think that potential is probably presently more realised in our staff than it is in communities. But if you'd been in this auditorium a few months back at the Health Improvement Conference, you would have seen the empowerment of staff made real as successions of clinicians, none of whom were particularly senior in their organisations, came on this stage and talked about the improvements they were effecting for people within their own communities in a very powerful way, and interestingly in a way that was highly professional, evidence-based, data-rich. So this actually was proving to be a very powerful development tool for staff. And that doesn't quite capture what I want to say, really, because I think actually there is something in this about the dignity of labour. there's a critical thing for us going forward about everyone who works in and around public services just sort of pinning their shoulders back and taking more pride in what they do and how they're able to do it through professionalism. And us as leaders of organisations making sure that in our reorganisations, in our downsizings, in whatever they might be, that we're thinking hard about creating contexts in which staff can be empowered and can develop themselves. This often means us doing less, actually, often means stepping back in a skillful way, and this is a harder task than doing it yourself, creating a context in which people can grow and develop as staff. There's still more to do, I think, in terms of how improvement sits with community empowerment. I think one of the rich pieces of discussion and dialogue that may follow this event may well focus on that. Let me say a little bit now, however, about creating an organisational context for improvement. And what I wanted to label this as, really, is creating the right type of affirmative culture within the organisations that we run. Because it does seem to me that a precondition of being able to use the improvement skill set is this willingness to recognise what's going well and to celebrate it and reward it, because that breeds confidence and realism, but also openly being able to say, this is not working as well as it needs to or it might. And that second part can often be difficult in hierarchical contexts. So my second point is to say that if you're going to be an effective manager in an outcomes and leader, effective leader and manager in an outcomes-focused, asset-based world, then emotional intelligence needs to be right at the forefront of what you do, and that capacity to celebrate and to challenge becomes absolutely center stage. And if you have personal reticence, culturally defined or otherwise, or you're anxious about hierarchies, then in the jargon you need to get over it, actually, because that's going to be standing in the way of you actually developing the context that you want for improvement and progress going forward. So we try to make it the done thing in our organisation to be ambitious about the area of work that you're in, and more broadly, to celebrate the areas where we plan to improve. So you don't drag it onto the table like a dead sheep and be apologetic for it. You actually say, well, we made some excellent progress in A, B and C, but if you look at area 4, then we've got a lot more to do. Let's face up and get on with it. And we don't go around talking to each other like press releases. And I think this is really important because we all work in publicly accountable organisations. When we go outdoors, we do talk in ways that talk up what we've achieved, that actually protect the government, ministers, councillors, whoever they are, position and move forward. But you can't indoors have that conversation and call it improvement. You've got to call a spade and celebrate people who can do that well and effectively. Now, this is not a whinger's charter. Emotional intelligence needs to be displayed across the range here. People need to be skillful and positive about the way that they describe these sort of issues, otherwise you get a lot of wasted energy. But I do think this is a really important organisational precondition for making the most of the improvement piece. The challenges, well, I think we have to be careful that we don't create a new orthodoxy. What was very interesting in the groups that I was able to be involved with this morning and this afternoon is actually there are quite a lot of improvement methodologies out there and lots of people doing improvement things but not calling them that. So I think as we develop this conversation, and I think we should, it's important that it does not become rigid or only one thing works. But that focus on evidence, I think, will be really important. And there has to be a place right at the heart of this for innovation, for creativity, and therefore for challenge. So I'd be absolutely with Carol Craig in her question to John Swinney this morning about finding the right place for that dimension. And of course, in that framework, we become more ready in the right way to acknowledge mistakes and areas where we need to go. Harry Burns later on this afternoon was very thought-provoking in asking the question about how an assets-based approach sits with improvement, and asked the sort of challenging question, made a statement in fact, that we need to do less. Actually, that public services in all its manifestations in many contexts can actually be disabling of communities and asset-based approaches, and in a thoughtful way we need to examine where actually we can add value and those places where we will add most value by withdrawing or working in a different way. And in the conversations in the working groups this afternoon, you could see the richness and the understanding about those sort of issues coming from the increasingly powerful reality of practice in community planning, partnerships, and beyond. A lot of emphasis too on creating the right environment for that, because we are all accountable. What we do is publicly visible, and actually having an environment where trust is generated and where the risks are properly evaluated and understood in a mature way, I think will be really important. So I've found this very, very stimulating conversation. I'm very grateful for everybody who's made it possible. What happens next is that Derek and Jason will write to you tomorrow so that you've got an email address to come back to. And those 3 bullets that follow are the sorts of things we'd be interested to hear from you about things that have really struck you, how you can imagine this being followed up, where you'd like to be involved. I think this creates the resource for the next period. We have a Scottish Leaders Forum planning group next month, and we will give a first fix, I think, to those responses there, but carry this forward in an open way and continue to involve everybody who's been at this conference in how that might come forward. And just to say that I actually do, this is my sense, my personal reflection today, that actually if we were not interested in outcomes and asset-based approach, we would think about improvement in a quite different way. We'd have it within the mindset of producing outputs in a more structured and silo-based way. Whereas the challenge, I think, here for us is richer and deeper, and maybe forms part of that bigger project which is at the heart of the Scottish Leaders Forum, which is defining a new type of professionalism in Scotland that spans the boundaries between public, private and voluntary sector, and actually resonates with those ideas about outcomes, community empowerment, asset-based approaches. And that becomes a critical part of our skill set. And when it becomes so, we will be able to recruit, to train and to develop a generation of public service professionals in Scotland who will be able to carry this forward onto the next stage. That seems to me to be our challenge and an exciting one at that. So huge thanks to everybody who's contributed here today. I hope you will answer Derek and Jason's email. You'll have more than 3 minutes to do so. I suspect if you don't, they'll follow it up, but huge thanks and safe journey. Thank you.